Great intro music, Nicolette. Thank you. Brad, I will kick us off with just a brief intro before passing it over to you and starting this official webinar. So thank you so much for joining us, folks watching this live, as well as folks who are gonna watch this recording. Huge welcome to our audience, limited partners, entrepreneurs, our extended PML family, folks in the ecosystem, and our new LPs who've joined us in our most recent fund. Prime Movers Lab, we are investing in breakthrough science inventions that have the ability to transform billions of lives across 6 pretty broad industry verticals, but including energy, infrastructure, manufacturing, human augmentation, computing, and of course, agriculture, what we're going to talk about today. The purpose behind these webinars is to share some of the things that we've been thinking about, some of the amazing folks that we've been able to meet across this ecosystem, and just share some of what we see as some of the biggest trends happening within kind of breakthrough science, and very emblematic of our style, wanting to kind of bring the community together to learn more. Cultivated seafood, what we're going to talk about today, the future of seafood, as you can see in Justin's great background, has been a particular interest for us. We've been doing a lot of work within clean protein, and then within that kind of very much narrowed down on kind of the cultivated cellular agriculture market within seafood. So I'm grateful for everything that the folks on this panel have taught us about this market, and we'll be looking forward to kind of investing in this space going forward. I'm Suzanne Fletcher, one of the general partners of Prime Movers Lab. I focus a lot within agriculture and robotics and automation. I've been an investor for about 20 years, 5 of which I ran a fund for Stanford. So I have seen a lot of things in that time period, but I'm super excited about kind of the epoch that we're in with deep tech right now. Housekeeping, we're going to keep this to an hour. Feel free to use the chat or Q&A throughout as we go. Brad and I will weave those questions in and make sure that we get stuff answered for people on this call. I'm going to ask Brad next to quickly introduce himself, and then we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves and dive into a whole host of seafood related questions. So if you are here because of the impact that this can have on the environment, personal health, or animals and how we treat them, I think there's a lot of great reasons to be really optimistic and interested in this topic. So Brad, over to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And we've definitely picked a topic that lends itself to bad puns. So we certainly will dive in, as you said, but I'm Brad Pruente. I'm the chief of staff here at Prime Movers Lab. My background is as an operator. I worked at a Y Combinator company in the semiconductor manufacturing industry for about 7 years before coming here and becoming an investor. I've spent the better part of the last year working with Suzanne and some of our other colleagues studying the future of agriculture, and just really excited today to talk about cultivated protein and how it's going to change the way that we think about fish and seafood. And, you know, selfishly, I love to eat, so I'm very interested in this, but kind of more professionally, I think this is a really large market. Everyone eats, and I think this is a technology that has the potential to touch quite a few people's lives. So with that, Chris, I'll kind of go around in the order that you're on my screen, but Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me on this webinar. My name is Chris Somogyi. Most pertinent to this is I'm founder of Blue Nalu, which is a company in San Diego working on a variety of fish. Prior to that, I started and sold a company called Decadence, regrowing parts of teeth using tissue engineering. I sold it to Europe's leading dental company. My background is bioengineering and venture capital and technology licensing at Stanford. Now I work for Xerox for PARC, but actually we just spun out a company called EverCase, and I'm the CEO of that. And what we do is we super cool food, including seafood, so that it stays unfrozen, but at below 0 temperatures for periods of up to weeks and retains all of its positive qualities.
Thank you. And Justin, I'll go to you next.
Hey everyone, Brad, I think you missed a pun. I think you said selfishly, and I think you could have said selfishly.
Thank you for that.
Anyway, yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Justin. I'm Justin Kolbeck, one of the co-founders of Wildtype. We're based in San Francisco. We're focused on making cultivated salmon, and in particular for sushi and poke and other raw and cured applications as our first product. What else? I'm a former diplomat. I care a whole heck of a lot about food security. I don't see how we feed 3 billion more people who all want to eat more meat and seafood without innovating on our means of production. And cultivated seafood and cultivated meat are certainly a part of that, not the only solution, but part of, I think, this big generational challenge that we all face. So thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you all.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. Pei, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Pei Wu. I'm the CTO at IndieBio and a partner at SOSV. We're an early stage deep tech investor. And we also run accelerator programs for pre-seed stage companies. IndieBio is where I'm housed, and we focus on finding solutions to problems in planetary and human health. And I think food sits squarely in the middle of both of those things.
Certainly agree. And finally, John, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. My name is John Pattison. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Decadence. We are a Wisconsin-based cell-cultured seafood company, specifically focusing on crustaceans and currently spending a lot of time on lobsters and decapods. My background is in business and finance. I worked at a mutual fund for a while, was in China doing consulting for about 3 years, and then came back and served in the Army as a tank officer for 4 years before going to NYU for my MBA. And that's where I had a serendipitous encounter with a Beyond Meat burger, thinking it was a hamburger, and kind of changed the whole course of my life. Got involved with New Harvest, turned down an investment banking offer, and then ended up working at New Age Meats out of my MBA program, and now have co-founded this company. But yeah, excited to be here and talk about this stuff.
Love it. It is quite the seafood platter we have today. So excited to talk about all of this. I wanted to just start with a question, and Justin, I think I'll direct it to you. Can you just zoom out and kind of explain to this audience what is cultivated meat?
Sure. Yeah. One-on-one question. Great. So the basic principle is we take cells that have a high proliferative ability. So if you think about stem cells, right, they have some unique attributes of having almost an eternally youthful character to them, so they can continue to divide and grow, very similar to a starting yeast that you find in baking, potentially indefinitely if you keep them in the right set of conditions. And so those cells can be expanded in a large fermentation tank. We have a few actually just right over there on our pilot plant floor. Very similar to fermentation like you've seen in breweries and other places. The tanks don't look all that different. They don't function all that different, frankly. They're a little bit, have a few extra attributes that you don't find in beer brewing. Then, at least in our setting, we take those cells and we place them on plant-based scaffolds that help to lend the final product both structure as well as help direct the cells into their final maturity. So the kinds of cells that we care about in our industry are things like muscle and fat, and that sort of nice stringy connective tissue that you get in steak and salmon, all kinds of seafood. So that's the basic idea. All of the pieces of the technical side of this have existed for a while, and I think this is the first time that we're sort of as an industry putting them all together in a coherent way. And I think it makes for really interesting scientific teams and really interesting product development arcs.
Yeah, I think the overused analogy that I like is growing hamburger without the cow. But I think, yeah, very interesting area. And Justin, I'll stick with you for a minute. What brought you to this problem? Why did you decide to start working on it? You touched on this in your intro, but maybe if you want to flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I had, like John, was serving with the US government for a long time. I was with the State Department, and my last assignment was on a provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan, in a place called Paktika province. And I didn't go there thinking I was going to spend a lot of time working on food security, but it ended up being one of the biggest issues I had to deal with the provincial governor there. And I came back from that assignment and decided to take a break and do an MBA at Yale. And met my co-founder at a dinner fortuitously 10 years ago, a guy named Maria Elfenbein, who had finished his MD PhD and was doing a residency in internal medicine at Yale. And a few years later, I was working as a strategy consultant and tossing around some ideas with him at dinner. And he told me about this technology that we could make. This was in 2015, a long time ago. Not that long in the arc of history, but a long time in the arc of this young industry. And he told me about this technology and how a researcher in the Netherlands had made a burger using this kind of technology. And I was so captivated, right? Because I think the issue that we face is that we all know we probably ought to eat less meat and seafood. It has a very high environmental footprint, at least the way that we make it today. The trouble is these foods are really good and they're integrated and ingrained in our culture, right? We have memories of barbecues as kids and salmon bakes and clam bakes and all these things. And convincing people to eat lentils and pulses is really hard. In fact, it just won't work. So what if we could just make something that was a no compromise alternative that had the same nutrition, had the same flavor, had the same everything, yet was made in a hyper more sustainable way, which I think as it pertains to our conversation today in the oceans is really relevant because we're now talking about the extinction of species in our lifetimes that I think it always counted on being in our oceans, like salmon by the middle part of this century if we don't change our ways. Bluefin tuna, maybe in the next decade or two. And so that's really for me what convinced me to do this. A good friend with a big idea and a massive challenge that I think connected with me personally.
Yeah, I have a 2-year-old, and so I'm quite convinced that we're not going to convince people to eat lentils. You've definitely sold me there. I want to, I touched on this in my intro. Everyone eats, and most people eat meat, but maybe in kind of more quantitative terms, John, if you want to kind of how big does this get? How big is this market? How fast is it growing?
Yeah, I think we're really focused in on crustaceans, and so I can kind of speak a little bit to those numbers. The lobster, crab, shellfish market is multi-billions. I think we sized it at around 5 here in the US and in part of North America. Shrimp in particular is one of the largest consumed portions of seafood anywhere, especially here. But from the lobster and crab side, it's really a supply constrained market because we're fishing from the wild fisheries, whether it's in up in Alaska or in Nova Scotia and Maine. And these fisheries are under constant threat, right? Climate change, increased ocean temperatures, decreases in yields potentially. And so there's an immediate need for us to develop these alternative sources of protein, and they can't be farmed or aquacultured like you can with other types of seafood. So for the US, the landings for US lobsters are around 60,000 tons a year. Canada contributes about the same. So pretty large market. And additionally, one thing that we like to point out is there's so much demand for crab and lobster that they've already invented an alternative for that decades ago in the form of surimi, or imitation crab and lobster meat, right? And nobody's buying that for the taste, right? That's or the texture. It's a very price sensitive consumer. And so we think that we can help satiate some of that demand long-term with this technology.
I think you're telling me that my dollar sushi is not real crab.
There's a reason why it's $1.
Chris, I think everyone, every fish, so to speak, is kind of a different market. I'd love to hear if your take on that question of how big does this get? How big is the market? When you joined Blue Nalu, what brought you to it?
Sure. I guess I was primarily drawn to it from a scientific standpoint. I mean, I had successfully started a company to regrow parts of teeth, which was kind of crazy at the time. I also heard about Mark Post's work in the Netherlands and was excited about it. I had the opportunity to present this whole subject matter to the senior group at Intellectual Ventures where I was working. And every month we would have about 20 folks, including Bill Gates, who would sit around and invent stuff for an entire day with a room full of patent attorneys. My job was to come up with the subject that they would jawbone about. And so I decided to throw this out there one day. He didn't like it at all at the time. Of course, now he's kind of a fan. So those just I think I liked the challenge. Why not do this? I had been a venture capitalist in Hawaii and was looking for compelling new technology there. The only thing I could really find that was terribly interesting was in the aquaculture space, but honestly, it was mostly about pen design and maybe robotic servicing of the pens. It really wasn't terribly stimulating. So I wanted to try something a little more exciting. I liked seafood because of a number of reasons. If we were to say, if you went to a steakhouse and they said, I'm sorry, we don't really have steak today, but we have some lovely raccoon, that wouldn't work for most people. But if you went to a seafood house and they said, well, we're all out of the snapper, but we have some really great sea bass, you probably just roll with it. So I love that there are hundreds of species of seafood that we consume happily. So I thought that was a nice competitive space to be. You can easily carve out your own domain. But also there is limited supply, as John pointed out. And a lot of it is seasonal, and the pricing fluctuates like crazy. And unlike chicken and beef and pork, mostly seafood is hunting. And it's an incredibly dangerous career. A lot of folks lose their lives or body parts out there. And we have a big problem with mislabeling and waste and filth in the industry. So I just felt like it was right for this kind of treatment.
And fun fact I'll throw in here is in part of our learnings about this industry, I think it was upwards of 80% of fish in the US is consumed in restaurant settings, because we as Americans do a poor job making fish at home. And as I've learned in the lockdown, often get admonished from microwaving fish in joint workspace. I want to turn now to kind of the technology side and talk a little bit more about what's changed what's changed now that's really enabled this to be an exciting time for cultivated meat and cellular agriculture. And Pei, very interested in your perspective, just given the transition you've seen in this industry and the sheer amount of companies at IndieBio and the great reputation IndieBio's got for having picked winners in this space.
Well, I think part of what we were able to do was actually be the first in the space. We were the first investors in Memphis Meats, which is now Upside Foods, which I believe was the first company that really was bringing to the fore the idea of culturing muscle tissue and turning it into chicken. So it's been really interesting through the years to see how the whole cellular ag space has evolved and grown and blossomed around the variety of types of proteins that people want to try and address. I mean, the fact that there are 3 different types of seafood on this panel alone. We at IndieBio also have a few different seafood companies as well, including finless foods. And each one is addressing, to your point, Chris, its own narrow particular species, which is a really interesting sort of like technological phenomenon as well, because I think that kind of parsing is not common when you look at other types of venture-backed technologies. What we're also really focused in on now, I think, it's understood and known that you can find any number of ways to start culturing these critical cell lines. The issue now is, as always, this question of scale and what are different approaches to addressing the scaling problem. And we in our portfolio have tried to address this both directly at the growth factor issue. So when culturing these cell cultures, you have to grow them in a media that is expensive and has some very expensive core ingredients. And so we are looking at a variety of technologies to address this growth factor issue, which I guess is kind of the elephant in the room, or the sperm whale in the room, or whatever pun we can use for today. But it's not just the biochemistry that is challenging. We're also looking at sort of different physics-based approaches to bring new bioreactors into play, and addressing that scaling problem from the other angle as well. And so there are no shortage of challenges to continue to address, so that we can, I think, as an industry, continue to push forward, specifically in the cell ag space. We also look quite a bit and work with many different plant-based companies too, both in the seafood sector and in the larger protein space. And I think there's really interesting opportunities there to bring different ingredients into the game. And again, new processing technologies to bring that texture and mouthfeel more in line with something that's delightful for people and that people will want to engage with.
Yeah, I think very much what we heard in our diligence is it's got to cost less and taste just as good, if not better. And getting us to that point is really what unlocks that. John, question for you, as you're doing kind of crustacean, how much does everyone here kind of have to stay in their swim lane? And what I mean by that is, how transferable is the technology from one species to another?
I don't know. I guess we'd all have to meet and show each other the goods, and see what's behind the curtains. I think, if we're thinking about texture, there's huge differences in texture between salmon and whitefish compared to crab and lobster and shrimp. I think there's certainly more conservancy, between the shrimp and lobster and crab. But I'm sure there's a lot that can be learned from, cell culturing parameters. They're all living in the ocean, right? So that's going to influence that to some extent, and influence the media formulations a bit. And then certainly on the marketing and the regulatory side as well. I think there's probably a lot of, non-competitive collaboration that could happen that's really going to help the whole industry and space collectively together. But, we're always open to talking to other companies and working with them, or exploring just, hey, where is there overlap? Where are things that we feel comfortable sharing or not sharing? Because at the end of the day, I think we're all pushing towards the same future, and that is, one where we're producing all the products people love to eat, just in a much friendlier way for animals, and hopefully a more responsible way for the planet and for human health.
And I want to go back to something kind of you started to bring up, calling it the sperm whale in the room, but it's really cost, right? And how expensive is this? And at Prime Movers Lab, we really love things that are non-consensus and cherish them dearly. And this is absolutely one of them. Will costs come down enough, right? I think there was an article that came out about 3 months ago in The Counter, right, that argued despite kind of billions of dollars of investment, the fundamentals of the industry really don't make sense. It's always going to be too expensive. Curious, maybe Justin, I'll start with you on this one. Just to zero in on this cost issue a little bit more, what did that article get wrong?
A couple of things, at least. That article got a lot of things right, by the way. We spoke to that reporter, and he's a very thoughtful, diligent, intelligent journalist. Did a nice job in that article. But I think there are at least two things to consider here. One is scrutinizing or criticizing too much on cost today is like beating Steve Jobs up in like 2004 about the first iPhone, right? That was pretty expensive back then. And people are like, are you ever gonna be able to make a computer this small at scale that's gonna fit in everybody's pocket in the world? I think people probably would have said no if he wasn't Steve Jobs. Or criticizing Elon Musk after he made the first Tesla Roadster, right? Journey's not done yet. And we are, as an industry, in the infancy, in the very earliest stages. But the difference, though, is that the market is so big. Trillions of pounds of seafood every year are consumed. It's just a colossal amount of seafood appetite. It's the biggest source of animal protein for our species. And so I think the second point, and I would actually disagree with you a little bit in your conclusion, Suzanne, in the diligence, I actually don't think it needs to cost less, and I'll tell you why. There is no seafood on the planet today that is mercury-free, antibiotic-free, microplastic-free, no impact to wild catch or coastal ecosystems. It doesn't exist, and we're making it. And so we do think people can and should pay a premium for that. Now, at really large scale, we agree. Like I think, you know, your average consumer in Walmart isn't going to be paying a premium for those kinds of things. But for the next 10 years, should they be? Yeah, I think so. And so if you think about just the pace of innovation and cost reduction that we've seen in other adjacent super tech heavy industries, combined with the size of the market and a huge demand curve, and you can meet consumers at any point on that demand curve, right? Even the very expensive parts. I think there's a story for a hyper profitable industry in the very near term for both of those reasons.
Yeah, no, I love it, and thank you for your disagreement on some of our conclusions. I think that's fantastic.
I would like to interject one point, which is
please do.
Your assertion, Justin, that there doesn't exist this magical seafood that is clean of mercury and has minimal to no environmental impact. I think there is really interesting work and actually a product that is entering into the market now in vertical aquaculture, which are closed systems that are growing seafood in a sustainable manner that do have clean products and are, because of their closed system, are able to limit and or eliminate any of the negative environmental impact that you would see in a traditional aquaculture type of setup. We have a company named Vertical Oceans, which is selling shrimp, premium shrimp into the Singaporean market today. And these, I would say that they exactly fulfill what you just described, Justin. And by all accounts, they taste delicious too.
The one caveat though is that if you think about what that looks like at scale for salmon, right? So salmon grow at 4 degrees Celsius, and the biggest on land RAS system is in Florida. So think about the carbon footprint of moving all of that fresh and seafood water to allow fish to swim around in a circle for a couple of years before harvesting them, right? I think there are some ingrained inefficiencies in there. I don't see that as the answer for these colossal problems that our oceans are facing on its own. I certainly think it's part of the solution. So, you know, I think, and you know, it's very early days for these RAS systems. I don't think there's been a single one of them that has scaled to the kinds of volumes that really matter in seafood production. So 100% agree with you. I think it's still, for that industry too, pretty early days.
Yeah, I would also add there is a big difference between growing shrimp and growing salmon, which is pretty core to some of the distinguishing features where for their TEA and their LCA.
We got a couple of questions in the chat, some of which touch on some kind of technical things. And we talked a little bit about what can you engineer out as you kind of pursue growing protein in this fashion. Got a question from a dear LP who we took to a seafood restaurant without realizing he had a seafood shellfish allergy. So I will ask this one on his behalf, which is, what are you able to do in terms of engineering out any allergic properties? Is that a thing? I'm going to ask that to anyone who knows the answer on this panel.
We did think about that, and like a lot of people are particularly allergic to halibut, and there's these, I think it's histamines that that are the culprit. Look, I think it's possible. Is it something that we can expect in the next year or two? I would say no, and not because of technical difficulty, but because there's plenty of other fish to fry. There's plenty of profit to be made by selling the beautiful sushis that Justin's company is making. And to me, the challenges here really are about the manufacturing process and the efficiencies and the yields, about storage, and about actually access to capital. It is true that yes, $1 billion or so has gone in, but it wasn't that long ago where, frankly, more money was spent on a high-end New York, condo than has gone into all of clean meat. And I use that because I got a chance to meet Jack Welch one day up in his condo pitching Blue Nalu, and I was saying everything in there was gold. It was gorgeous. But that at that time, I don't think there was even $100 million put into this entire industry. So that needs to grow significantly. These plants are going to be expensive, right? And we're using, in some cases, we're using the kinds of things that Justin was mentioning, the brewery type equipment, but there's an opportunity here to invent all kinds of brand new pieces of hardware, and getting that financed is not going to be straightforward.
In realistically, as our audience learns about cultivated meat and starts to think about, I think, Justin, some of what you laid out really well, explaining scaffolding and pay, explaining serum and media and what it grows in, what percent actually needs to be animal cell-based for it to start tasting right?
I mean, there are plant-based, totally plant-based examples out there that are tasting right. I think that is, so most literally, it could be 0% animal cell-based in order to get something that tastes right. I think where things start getting curious is where texture and mouthfeel combined with taste, and then protein profile and those nutrients. That's where it starts getting a little bit complicated.
I haven't tasted any plant-based seafood that tastes anything close to the real thing. So I would disagree on that, unless there's a brand that you that you love. But I think the mammalian stuff and the poultry stuff is like way closer. I think there's just so much, like we buy the plant-based stuff for our company from time to time just to do tastings, and we did the KFC Beyond Chicken Nuggets yesterday, and those were like legit awesome. Like I would buy those again, and I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian. The home version ones are not good. Don't buy those. Yeah, I think, and sorry, getting back to I had some coughing there. You probably saw me dive off screen, but in terms of the allergy thing, like I think it brings up an important point, especially on the shellfish side, where like roughly, I think it's 3 to 5% of the population has a shellfish allergy, and it's typically the trypamycin, which is found in the mussel. We've definitely thought about like knocking that down or out in a final product, but it just speaks to how important labeling is and how important customer education or consumer education is, and like that they don't think that the salmon that Justin is making is fake salmon or imitation salmon. Like it is real salmon, right? It's just made in a different way. The same with the shellfish that we're developing as well. So I think that's really important.
Justin, I wanted to go back to kind of what you were talking about a little bit earlier. One of the questions that came in from the audience is, when does this start to matter at scale? I mean, if you're talking about really starting to solve some of the problems that we have with existing fisheries and how kind of the status quo of eating fish, how long does that take before we're sort of starting to make a dent there?
Gosh, that's such a good question. And honestly, I love John's point about like the importance of collaboration. There are 3 companies represented here and one very important accelerator. There could be literally 500 companies represented here who are all wildly successful over the next decade, and we would still only take maybe 5 to 10% out of the global seafood supply if we're all just doing amazingly fast work. The market is just so huge, right? And I think we cannot be ambitious enough when it comes to like growing and scaling, as long as we're doing it obviously responsibly and thinking about all the reasons that brought us here, right? We don't want to be creating huge factories that are like churning out clouds of methane and smoke and particulates and all these things. Obviously, we would never do that. But the scale has to be so big. And so it sort of begs the question of, at what point do we pull in the conventional players to really kind of team up with us, and what do those partnerships look like? And the reason it's pertinent is because they actually don't bring any technical expertise that's relevant to what we're doing. The right technical partners are like pharma companies, which don't know anything about selling food at large scale. But the people with the distribution channels and the know-how and the way to kind of ship products cost effectively around the world are obviously interested in this technology and are really trying to get their arms around how it works and like where this plays into their portfolio. And I have not had a single conversation with any of these companies over the last few years that has left me wondering that they're absolutely committed to these same values. I think their customers are asking for transparency and traceability in the supply chains. They're asking for like, hey, please stop hunting our wild fish populations to the brink of extinction. Please preserve the biodiversity in our oceans that allow us to sink 97% of the planet's carbon and store it safely there. Let's not mess with that, please. As we're facing down a global warming crisis. And so I think that has to be part of the answer. Maybe not in the next 2 years, but definitely in the next decade. Is, when do we bring these larger players in to really step on the gas in a big way?
Yeah, thank you. I think probably all of you have thought about this next question I want to ask, but I'll start with you, Chris. Simplifying a little bit, Impossible with plant-based meat went to chefs when they went to the market, and Beyond went to the grocery store. It's more nuanced than that, but kind of just to dumb it down a little bit. I'm curious, how do you think about what the right go-to-market is, and does that change based on what the product is? So, Chris, if you have thoughts there.
Yeah, well, I think it is such a huge market, and there's so many different ways of doing it. There's room for everything. There's room for just starting boutique, almost brew pubs, just a line of your own restaurants and just setting that up, and that could be your brand. There's opportunity maybe to even carve out, do it at home kind of kits. So and all of those will have a shot. I'm pretty sure of it. We when I was at Blue Nalu, and we decided to go after chefs because we felt that we needed to establish kind of this culinary credibility aspect. So who would know better that in fact we are capturing the taste and the cookability than some professional chefs. So actually at Blue Nalu, we had a noted seafood restaurateur as one of our core founding investors, and we partnered with the Culinary Institute of America, and that was important. In many other areas, if you're going to introduce a new product in the dental space, you go to the thought leaders in dentistry. You try to get the full-blown dentist to approve it. So they're deemed the experts. And if you're someone who can't cook fish properly at home, you really want to talk to someone who knows about that. And I think it's been helpful, at least for Blue Nalu, and I think it was the right move.
I'm waiting to see if anyone else wants to weigh in there. Otherwise, we can move on.
Just to stir the pot, because that's what I like to do on these things. Beyond did launch first and went public first, and I don't know what's going on with Impossible. So anyway, I think the point is, to Chris's point, it's a huge market in a lot of ways to win, and it'll be fun. It'll be fun to see how different brands position themselves, sort of brand forward, like what we're doing, white label. I know other companies on the meat side are really kind of focused on that strategy. Retail versus food service. There's so many ways to win here. I think time will tell as to what makes the most sense.
Can you guys give us an idea for when customers are going to be able to start eating your product in the US? I think we've whet everyone's appetite. A lot of people are doing their healthy Januaries and are very motivated and eager. What's the timing in terms of before this becomes mainstream available? And what regulation has to change first?
I think the regulation has to allow these foods to enter into the US market. That is a big, I mean, there's a reason why Eat Just is able to serve in Singapore, is because the Singaporean Food Agency decided to make a regulatory stake in the ground, salmon stake in the ground, on the matter. And that is, I think it's interesting to see that Singapore as a nation has decided to double down. I think this has a lot to do with their unique concerns around food security for them, and their willingness and desire to be a very innovation forward nation. And so I think that the fact that their regulatory body was willing and able to move forward with allowing the entrance of a cell-based meat product into their market is a reflection of all those factors. Time will tell, I think, what's going to happen here.
So, one of the things when I was brainstorming with Suzanne, what we wanted to ask, each of you, at least the three of you who are working kind of directly in this area, have picked a different fish or seafood to target. And so, John, I'll start with you, but I'm just curious, what brought you to lobster? Why not crab or octopus or any other fish you could have chosen?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. One, I think when we were starting the company, we were looking at where were our core competencies from a technical standpoint. And, my co-founder, Ian, was previously at a different cell cultured seafood company, but had a lot of the skill sets around like primary cell isolation and working with different types of species that people just really hadn't tried to culture before. So that was important. Two, from a business standpoint, like what is a large addressable market that has a high unit price point that doesn't have an alternative production method that there's an immediate environmental need for? So that's kind of how we narrowed down our selection. And then three, looking at where was there opportunity to, one, do something really, really difficult that nobody else was working on, that would have massive impact and that could develop a lot of unique IP for the company and for the industry, and ultimately, being able to hopefully share some of that knowledge with people in Maine and the fisheries themselves that may help those fisheries longer term to survive and thrive. So probably a couple different animals that could have fallen into that one, but we felt like the North American or American lobster was the best one.
Justin, what about you?
Yeah, John hit all the right points that we went through too to kind of land on salmon. I guess the only thing I'd add is, we didn't want to be Memphis Meats based in Emeryville, California. We wanted to make, a company that's creating something that's local that makes sense to produce here. And so, from the Bay Area up through Alaska is Pacific salmon country. This is where it's caught and grown. And so it made sense to kind of make this place our home. And we haven't necessarily decided to stay 100% always in San Francisco. More to come on that soon, but we'll be in this region.
Glad to be the platform for your any announcements you want to make. Chris, I'll wrap up this question with you.
Sure. We actually were technically formed in Honolulu in a little office not too far from the Aloha Tower. And we had our eyes on Hawaiian fish, like the mongchong or pomfret, wonderful tasting fish, but has to be line caught and almost impossible to get. Really too many places outside of Hawaii. If I wanted to stroll into a restaurant here in Madrid and say, do you have any of that really great mongchong? the perplexed facial expression. So that's another thing I like. There's some wonderful flavors in seafood that is simply utterly unavailable to people across the world. You just literally can't ship a fresh pomfret from Honolulu to Madrid, and pull it off. It's just the time isn't there. So we were attracted to that, but we got to know a fellow down in Florida that was attempting to do aquaculture around mahi-mahi. And we thought that was kind of interesting. It's a nice versatile fish. It's got a good balanced flavor. It's popular all the way around, but it can't do well in aquaculture because as juveniles, they start to kill each other in the tank. So it was inherently limited. It was a fish that would be great to have more of, but wasn't really in the cards. So we started with that, and then we did find some great source. Getting the source of juvenile, and you need sort of a teenage fish, was actually kind of a challenge in the beginning. We found some good sources for other species, and so we pursued that. So last time I checked in, which was a while ago, at Blue Nalu, there were several different species under development. And maybe just to answer an earlier question, they're distinct enough, even the ones that seem pretty similar, where there's no ibidding. It's a whole new notebook.
That's a great segue into talking about kind of the investment landscape and kind of where things may be overhyped versus underhyped at this stage. I mean, I think it was Brad's and my macro take that seafood is still relatively very underhyped when you look at how much money has gone into chicken and beef and other forms. Seafood feels about 5 years behind, but interested, Pei, maybe to start with you and your kind of macro lens and what's kind of over versus underhyped in this landscape.
Well, I don't know about over under hyped. I try to stay away from the hype train, but I will say that where we're seeing opportunities is actually a lot more in sort of the horizontal and fundamental technologies that are going to be going into the scaling elements of this entire sector, whether it's seafood or not. I think that's probably where I'm most excited by opportunities to really make a dent and actually help bring this entire sector forward and really into market. I think I mentioned, we're looking at new physics-based approaches to bringing better and different bioreactors into play that aren't going to look anything like the beer brewing fermenters that we're accustomed to seeing, but really things that bring different modalities into the problem and can significantly accelerate and increase the cell density that you would be able to see in 3D suspension, for example. So these are types of problems that we see as really fundamentally limiting and sort of like root cause issues to the scaling problem that we'd really like to see more energy going towards. That's.
Any disagreements or other things to add on this from the rest of the panel?
I get asked, what do I think about the direction and what would I invest in now? And honestly, if I were to do it again right now, I probably wouldn't launch a new company of the type that we're talking about here. I would actually focus exactly on what Pei was saying. I would get into the equipment and the processing. I think there's all kinds of untested and unperfected, yet to be perfected notions there. So a lot of cells like to adhere to something, right? So they just feel more comfortable when they know they're hugging something. They need sort of a teddy bear. And so those are what we call carriers, and those are like plastic or glass beads. They want to be on those. So if you've got a process that requires them, means you have to introduce millions of glass beads so the cells have something to latch onto. Then you need to deintroduce it, right? So you're managing all this stuff. if you could get the cells not to do that and just live in suspension, that'd be great. And some people have that, and some people are moving towards that. So that's an example. The batch processing versus a continuous processing, that's going to have a big effect. The waste. Some of these compounds that we feed the cells are very expensive, don't need to be, just happen to be. And if you feel like, well, we've got some waste building up in the space, let's flush it out and put in a new batch of the expensive stuff. Well, that's kind of nuts. It'd be much better just flush out the waste selectively, right? I like to think about nature. If you think about a salmon embryo, it starts off life with this little yolk sac. Why can't the carrier be a yolk sac? Or you think about a leaf. What is a leaf on a tree? It's a concentration of waste products that the tree discards. So I think there's some interesting technologies, biomaterials, process designs that can really come in and be exciting. And I think there's a lot of IP space that can be carved out.
Yeah, we very much agree with that, and are taking a hard look at kind of the picks and shovels, potential future players in this space. Justin,
I think, can I jump in there real quick? I think,
please.
Like the picks and shovels idea, I mean, it is from our perspective true to an extent, but like certain species that nobody's ever done before, like their cells behave differently, like some of the intracellular properties are different. Like, you know, in some sense, the picks and shovels are the cells themselves, right? And like how we can use those to create different products. And some of those companies, I think, including ours, and maybe Justin, you as well, and Blue Nalu, but like you have to develop that stuff in-house, and it would be hard to share the problems that you're having, you know, and with carriers or suspension or bioreactor design or whatever, with somebody else without giving up so much IP that, you know, you just gut your company. So I think there is some truth to, you know, there's certainly support companies that could develop and be investable, but I mean, there's others that we've seen where it's like they want to talk about like scaling up adherent cell culture, and like that already exists, right? Or like, you know, these products have already existed for decades. They've just not been used for food, but would welcome disagreement on that for sure.
We certainly heard a lot of some of the more kind of, I'll just call them easily, pharma inputs are just merely expensive because that's been the buyer so far. And that will change as food companies become the buyer. Did anyone want to disagree with John on that point before I have one more investment question here? Yeah, I'll turn to Justin. I really want to understand from your perspective. I mean, you've been at this a number of years, and you've really gotten great traction, have an amazing set of investors. What has changed in kind of your most recent fundraising experience versus when you were earlier on in your journey, in terms of the market and the interest right now?
Oh, good question. I'm sure Pei would have some really good thoughts on this too, from her point of view. Look, I mean, we first started talking to investors in 2016, and back then this was like, whoa, crazy idea, interesting, never going to work. You know, in 2021, it was more like, I'm starting to feel some FOMO, because like, you know, Beyond Meat was a big win, Impossible was a big win, and those are just like 2 products out of hundreds that can be made using better, cooler technologies of all sorts: plant-based, vertical farming, vertical fishing, etc. So I'd say that the biggest difference is just there have been a couple winners where, you know, this is like a real thing. It's no longer this like hypothetical cool science thing that might turn into something big one day, maybe. And the other thing I'd say that's tangibly different is that a number of companies have made really good products. Like, you can go taste it, rather than just like drinking up some cells out of a pipette, which I have done. I'm sure others here have done too. So yeah, I think that's probably 2 of the biggest things, that you can actually start to see the products now. And there's a proven market for alternative proteins that we can lean on.
We're starting to come up on time, so I want to move into some of our lightning round questions, and I'm going to start with a kind of fun one I think that came in from the audience, which is that if we're building these foods from cells, we don't have to limit ourselves to what nature has given us, to tuna and salmon and lobster. We can make Frankensteaks, so to speak. First question is, do you think about that at all? Second question is, what's your vote for a Frankensteak type of food? Pei, I'll start with you on that.
I want something with the gaminess of lamb, but the nice texture of a tuna.
Chris, for this serious question, I need to know your answer here.
I think with enough marketing dollars, you get people to buy anything. They buy bologna and mortadella and hot dogs right now, right?
There's an argument we've already got Frankensteaks.
Yeah.
Justin, do you want to take a stab at this?
Gosh, I would just say no and no. We bought a bunch of URLs in the early days, one of which was sci-fifoods.com, which I just happily parted ways with.
Is it still available? Can I pick that up, or is that?
Was it you, John? I don't know. I felt like your GoDaddy, so it might have been.
I think, yeah, I mean, we think about it from time to time. I think one that would be cool, I just thought about this too, would be like to have something that looks like Justin's product, but instead of the flavor profile of salmon, the white is bacon fat, and then the pink is scallop meat. So it's a bacon wrapped scallop, but in a salmon form, I think would be kind of cool.
That's a good answer.
Seafood turducken.
Right.
In Europe, they sell these little kind of designer marzipan fruits, right? And some of them look beautiful. And so you're biting into something that looks like a cherry, and your brain is thinking cherry, and then it's almond paste. But yeah.
And for this last question, I think I'll just look for a yes or a no answer. In 100 years, are we still going to be killing animals to eat them? And I'll go in the same order here. So, hey, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Chris.
Yeah.
Justin.
Yes.
John.
Yeah.
All right. I've made notes. I'll be holding you all to this. Well, I think we're right about at our hour. So I want to say thank you to all of you panelists. Thank you, Suzanne, for organizing this. As a reminder to the audience, our next webinar will be in 2 weeks, and our head of manufacturing, Brian, will be hosting that one. So please check our blog, and we'll be announcing more info about that. And with that, thank you everyone for coming, and we hope you enjoyed it. Bon
Thank you
appetit.
guys so much.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.